Suddenly the great beast beat its hideous wings, and the wind of them was foul. Again it leaped into the air, and then swiftly fell down upon Éowyn, shrieking, striking with beak and claw. Still she did not blench. Maiden of the Rohirrim, child of kings, slender but as a steel blade, fair but terrible. A swift stroke she dealt, skilled and deadly. The outstretched neck she clove asunder, and the hewn head fell like a stone. Backward she sprang as the huge shape crashed to ruin, vast wings outspread, crumpled on the earth, and with its fall the shadow passed away. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. I hope you all are staying warm coming into the holiday season. I would like to thank my patron Raffi for making the new intro animation and thumbnail overlay. Thanks man, it really means a lot. Today we are going to look at yet another enigmatic creature in Tolkien's Middle-earth, the fell beasts who are the steeds of the Nazgûl. However, before we begin, I should clarify that the term fell beast is really a sort of catch-all name, as it refers to certain creatures of Mirkwood, or those hunted by Orome as well, for instance. The archaic and ambiguous name for these creatures fits with the enigmatic nature of Tolkien's works, but in this video I will be speaking about the flying steeds of the Nazgûl, as well as some potential ideas about them. More articles and videos related to this topic may be found in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. The fell beasts, Nazgûl-birds as Tolkien calls them in a letter, or hellhawks as Beregond named them. The steeds of the Nazgûl are large bird or bat-like creatures without feathers. They had long necks, webbed and horned fingers, and beaks and claws. In the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien number 211, a reader of Tolkien's works asks about the pterodactyl-like nature of these creatures, to which in response Tolkien admits that it was not his intent to make these creatures like pterodactyls, which he said is drawn with less mysterious evidence than what is behind many of the creatures of the semi-scientific mythology of the prehistoric, since such findings were newer in his day. But he admits that fell beasts and pterodactyls share commonalities and owes much to this prehistoric mythology. And with the description he gives of fell beasts, they may have been survivors of older geological eras in Middle-earth, in his words. Now, all of this is interesting, as such a statement harkens back to the elder days of Middle-earth, in which Melkor or Morgoth created beings in mockery or perverted other creatures which may have had some relation to these fell beasts, but we'll circle back to that in a moment when we explore the possible origins of these creatures. Let's first look at the history and lore of these creatures within the legendarium. The first time a fell beast is encountered by us as readers is in the Fellowship of the Ring along the Anduin River in early 3019 of the Third Age. Legolas with the bow of the Galadhrim shoots it and its rider out of the sky. It carried with it some measure of dread, but whether that dread came from the beast or the rider or both, we cannot be entirely sure. These creatures most definitely bore a dreadful stench, though. However, another such creature is later seen by Frodo, Sam, and Gollum while they traveled through the Dead Marshes and one flew overhead. It is also said by the orcs in the company of the Uruk-hai who captured Merry and Pippin that a winged Nazgûl awaited them on the bank of Anduin. Another Nazgûl is seen flying overhead towards Isengard after Pippin spoke to Sauron through the Palantir. A fell beast over Edoras is seen by the men in Rohan as well. One Nazgûl on this creature would also fly near to Frodo and Sam as they escaped the Tower of Cirith Ungol in Mordor as well. Then, of course, the Nazgûl would use their dreadful flying creatures during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and after the steed of the Witch King frightened the steed of Theoden and landed, Éowyn would slay it in melee combat before also killing the Witch King himself. Then, all 8 others would appear on their fell beasts during the Battle of the Black Gate, and would do battle with the Great Eagles. And they would perish, some if not all in the erupting fires of Mount Doom as they sped towards the One Ring. After this, we know not if any fell beasts yet survived in Middle-earth, and even if they did, it's doubtful they would survive long in the world of men. Now, let's talk about some ideas and speculations concerning these beasts, their origins, as well as their overall usage in the works. While the fell beasts are certainly not fire-breathing dragons, it may be that they were descended from them or that they were cold drakes, as it seems that fell beasts share certain similarities with that species, also being akin to wyverns. Further, it seems that this may be the case, as Sauron was definitely not as powerful as Melkor, so his servants of creation would not be as powerful as his masters if Sauron had a hand in breeding these creatures. However, there may be other possibilities as well, as we know not what other kinds of beasts in Middle-earth there may have been, especially in the distant north, south, and east. It could be that these creatures were made in mockery of the Eagles of Manwë, as they would foil one another during the Battle of the Black Gate. Maybe they were thus made by Morgoth himself in the Elder Days. Or perhaps just as there were giant elephants called olifants or mumakil, there were giant pterodactyl or bat-like creatures that were far bigger even than the giant bats that fought in the Battle of Five Armies. And the servants of Sauron tamed and or bred them to be the steeds of the Nazgûl, and the Ringwraiths only, for it is noteworthy that they alone rode them, and no other lieutenant of Sauron did. Perhaps the Nazgûl themselves had a hand in breeding these creatures, as it seems that these creatures had certain connections with their Nazgûl riders, or at least the 9 rings of men that would have made other riders impossible. The Witch King mentions an ambiguous place called the Houses of Lamentation to Éowyn, and perhaps such creatures may have come from there or beyond. However, I would be surprised if these drake-like creatures had no relation to the Cold Drakes, since they share so many similarities to the draconic servants of Morgoth, both in utility and physical features. In the Lord of the Rings Online Minas Morgul expansion, there is an area near Minas Morgul where you can encounter the breeding ground of the fell beasts and even fight them. Now obviously this isn't canon, but I wonder if it's at least close to what could possibly have been the case. Now regardless of their origins, let's step back and look at these creatures as Tolkien used them, as well as the general lore surrounding them, as it may provide an explanation as to why their origins are so enigmatic, and their usage is actually somewhat odd throughout the books. While it does seem that the men of Gondor and Rohan are at least somewhat familiar with these creatures during the war, meaning that they may have encountered them before, I do find it odd that the fell beasts were used in some instances and not others. For one thing, I feel that, at least as written in Letter 211, Tolkien originally did not intend for the fell beasts to seem like pterodactyls, although they did have many similarities even he could not deny, which tells me that he was not incredibly attached to a particular different sort of depiction of them away from such things. When they had made an appearance only later in The Lord of the Rings, and then only appear more and more often the further into the story we get, it actually makes me think that they were not planned from the beginning of the tale by Tolkien, but rather just kind of came along as the story progressed. Without there being provided a very solid, retroactive explanation as to why the fell beasts weren't really used, as far as we know, at the beginning or before The Lord of the Rings. For instance, when the 9 Nazgûl rode their horses into Eriador searching for the One Ring, it may have behooved them to actually have had their winged steeds instead, as finding Frodo and his companions would have been a lot easier, searching from up above, and they would not even have to fight the hobbits. The fell beasts could have simply picked up the hobbits and taken them to Barad-dûr. Of course, this would have cost them the element of secrecy, so this makes me think that Tolkien actually had the idea for these creatures later in his writing of The Lord of the Rings, and not towards the beginning of the story. And it would aid him in placing Nazgûl where he wanted them to be for story purposes, such as Isengard at the end of the Gandalf section of the Two Towers, or at the Tower of Cirith Ungol in the beginning of the Frodo part of the Return of the King. Also, it would make the Nazgûl stand out from the simple field commanders on the ground, giving Sauron dreadful air superiority in all major combat scenarios, except for when the Eagles appeared. The fell beasts would also maximize the dread that our heroes could feel at really any given time, knowing that a Nazgûl could swoop down and be among them in a matter of seconds. However, just like at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, it is interesting that after the breaking of the Gate of Minas Tirith, the Witch King chose to use a horse instead, when almost immediately after he takes back to the skies on his fell beast once more, and ambushes Theoden from above, when he might have used his creature to greater ability throughout the battle. Of course, from the meta-story perspective, we wouldn't have wanted this, as it would have ruined certain moments, having the fell beasts around constantly, but it is interesting to note. With Tolkien's usage of these creatures in mind, I feel that they were useful creatures in crafting particular scenarios for the Nazgûl, as well as our observing characters, but not in other situations, thus making them plot devices that did not need an incredible amount of explanation behind them, other than the fact that they were dreadful creatures that could fly very quickly. It is quite fascinating, this topic, and sometimes such creatures are needed in stories to make particular moments happen, but the inconsistency of usage concerning the fell beasts throughout the tale is also noteworthy, as I can think of a few moments the Nazgûl could have heavily benefited from them, but did not use them. But let me know what you all think. What else can we discover of the fell beasts from their enigmatic but necessary moments in the plot of The Lord of the Rings? And what other theories might you have concerning their origins? And so we come to the end of our tale on the birds of the Nazgûl. From the story and questions behind the fell beasts of the Nazgûl, we see it is best never to underestimate those with harmful intentions, as they might make use of things we do not understand. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this Beings of Middle-earth video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on the fell beasts? Let me know in the comments below. These creatures have always fascinated me, especially in the Lord of the Rings games. They always make for interesting and frightening opponents. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, Kondar, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrulik, and Kuzan, our newest Valar tier patron. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of our patrons, it really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a video on the epic character history of High King Fingolfin of the Noldor. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.